I did not vet. I didn't wear condoms. Now I have a 1-year-old son and another one due in about 5 months. We swap notes. Now, I'm sure people have heard all kinds of different stories about us, but I'm here to give you a glimpse inside the locker room. Here, we're going to discuss the field reports that happened a few years back. Brand new guys who are trying to learn the strategies that we talk about. Who am I? I used to be one of these brand new guys. I, like you, was pretty good at women in relationships, but I wasn't great at it. Hard times hit, things got tough, and it turns out there's nowhere for a man to go nowadays that actually wants him to succeed, to thrive, to get better at what he does and improve his lot in life. So, like most guys, I took it upon myself, found a bunch of guys in the same boat as me, and together we built a set of working strategies based on the experience of hundreds of thousands of men, just like us. Welcome to the locker room. I subscribed to the Red Pill about 2 years ago, along with a couple self-help subreddits like Stop Gaming, Stop Drinking, NoFap. I saw rapid results. I dated a few girls, got into an LTR with a girl who used to date a friend of mine. Admittedly, I cherry-picked different Red Pill philosophies. I did not vet. I didn't wear condoms. Now I have a 1-year-old son and another one due in about 5 months. I do not regret my decisions. I accept this responsibilities thrust upon me. I was previously hesitant to post in the Red Pill due to the massive amount of useless, unhelpful comments I was expecting to receive. I never looked too deeply into the manosphere, but I hope this is the right place to talk about this. I'm not married to this girl, but I am not counting it out in the future, and at the very least, I plan on building a family together with her and our children. I believe I have a fairly stable Red Pill type relationship with her. I lift. I steer the ship during date and family time. I receive no questions when it comes to spending time on myself. I'm continuing to better myself through school, through hobbies, through work. She stays at home, raising our 1-year-old son, cleaning the apartment and cooking dinner every night. Blue Apron, amazing service. I've had a couple troubles with video game addiction in the past and recently fell off the wagon. I'm ashamed to say I binge played an online game for nearly a month. I even hid it from her, going to the library before work and playing for nearly 8 hours a day before heading to work. This started to create a rift in our relationship, and I think we had sex maybe one time the entire month. I have since deleted the game, got back in the gym, started pulling my life back together. There was an incident about 3 weeks ago into my gaming binge. She makes soap in her free time and had created a care package she wanted to ship back home to an ex-boyfriend and his now wife. When she explained this to me, I felt a pit in my stomach. I blew off her request, and the package sat on the counter for another week. Another week where I lost my soul to this damn video game. Next weekend, she brought the package down to the car and asked me if I could ship it out. I gave her a flat no. She left it in the back seat, no further questions. And last night, a few hours after, we fooled around, out of the blue, she asked me if we could ship the package out today. I blew her off and went to sleep. Now, I know that I've been dealing with this in a childish, unproductive way, but this is where I am today, and I hope to learn and grow from this experience. I have contemplated throwing the package away, telling her to throw the package away, or simply trying to have a conversation about why I do not feel it appropriate to be sending a care package to her ex-boyfriend. I'll admit, I've often felt like I'm a little bit on the autistic spectrum. I'm sure many of you can tell right away from my story. Any harsh criticism is appreciated, and from people who can relate to this, even more appreciated. Mate guarding. Mate guarding is a hardwired instinct that most guys have when they're worried about the fidelity of the girl they're with. It usually manifests, it can be in simple ways, where a guy becomes more affectionate, a little bit on the clingy side, takes expressions of female disinterest and doubles down on showing extra comfort. And then it can realm into the process of paranoia, and that involves GPS trackers, calling a girl constantly, very needy, validation seeking behavior. Obviously, it's bad for the most part. The instincts used to be fairly valuable. When you were worried about this stuff, it involved a simpler time. We were kind of more brutish. Guys would just do whatever, and this mate guarding was your way to find out if you needed to club a cave dude. But in modern society, they're kind of working against us here. We've been given too many signals, and too many of them can be false positives. For example, girl with a cell phone, if she wants to cheat, there's no amount of tracking you can do. There's hundreds of different apps. There's plenty of different ways to conceal one's tracks. So all this paranoia does is it encourages the person, if they are cheating, to be more clever about it and essentially to hide the behavior that you're actually searching for. Or in the case of somebody who is faithful and it's merely paranoia on the guy's part, it actually drives them further away and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. In this case, you can kind of see it's more of the latter for this guy. He's very aware of his display of lower value from a relationship and from a sexual standpoint here. And this manifests, instead of looking inward, it's looking outward, where it must be her giving this piece of soap to a guy that she's known years ago because she's trying to sleep with him, even though she's got signing the wife's name on the thing. The whole situation is weird, but just be aware, for the most part, this is your brain playing tricks with you. The Drunken Captain. This is a mental model that Jack Ten of Hearts, an old married red-pilled poster, came up with. And it's the idea that for a guy who's in a failing relationship that is pretty much 100% his fault, it usually boils down to one of three different archetypes. In this case, it's the drunken captain, the guy who isn't able to steer his own ship, and the wife is forced to kind of step up and become the leader of the household. Now, the problem with this is girls don't like to lead, they like to be led. It's part of what makes them tick when it comes to relationships. It's just one of those things. I don't really need to explain it. I'm just aware that it exists, and I act accordingly. Normally what happens is a girl becomes increasingly resentful when she has to coddle her husband, her boyfriend, the guy she's dating, and it leads to all kinds of unattractive behavior. The problem with this, though, is that girls have some faulty mental models of their own. Usually this manifests as in nagging, attention-seeking behavior, self-destructive behavior, you name it. And the guy is normally not responsive to these kind of behaviors of frustration. So it causes him to double down on his own unattractive behaviors, and it's essentially watching a train wreck happen in slow time. Addiction. I'm not going to sit here and talk about addiction as if I was some kind of clinical psychologist or somebody who deals with addiction from a professional standpoint. I'm looking at it from a strictly sexual strategy standpoint. In this case, addiction is a behavior that replaces something else that's missing. If a guy is playing video games incessantly, for example, and he's doing it to have that feeling of accomplishment, progression, it's usually because there's something in his life that's missing that trait. It's the same way as when somebody finally quits smoking and loses that addiction. They still have the oral fetish, so you'll always see him sucking on lollipops or other kinds of things, or chewing on sticks, chewing on pencils, chewing on pens. You get the idea. So from a sexual standpoint, most deviant male behaviors stem from a lack of something else in their life. Now, I don't know this guy, he hasn't mentioned it, but usually this is the case of stagnant career progression or the lack of tangential goals in his life that causes him to seek video games as his surrogate. Now, this isn't the same as the guy who plays video games because let's say he's in the military, just got deployed, has almost no free time, and the little free time he does have, he spends to himself relaxing. That's a unwinding behavior. That's not what we're talking about. The reason you can tell the difference here is exactly the same one as you can tell for many other covert contracts. It's the, as Dr. Glover puts it, hiding the badness. So when he gives that line here about how he sneaks off to the library, pretending like he's going to work, but actually playing video games, that tells you that 1, he knows it's a bad behavior, 2, he knows that his girl will not accept that kind of behavior. And 3, he still wants to do it. So what he does is he hides the behavior from her as if somehow that makes everything better. I'd like to say it's just a simple matter of a guy getting his bootstraps together, getting some gumption and getting past it, but there's clearly some kind of psychological, chemical addiction mechanisms here that I'm not very good at explaining or articulating. But in general, once you stop treating this as something that's a willpower to overcome and a process to change, it tends to become a lot easier. So in this case for the guy, if he's spending 8 hours a day playing World of Warcraft, when he should be spending those 8 hours a day doing anything else, I'm assuming catching up on sleep or whatever, generally filling those up with a different process and setting him up for success, obviously deleting the accounts, everything you need to do to make it kind of the natural decision to do anything else, those tend to fill those behavior sets and replace them. Beyond that, I mean, there's professional help from people who are much better with addiction than I am, and so they're able to fill in the gaps on this one. The advice for this guy. I'm going to start this off with a question somebody had already asked him to kind of get him thinking here. So what is it you get from the game? I'm a drug addict. I know what I get from drugs. I've also been a gaming addict. I almost maxed out a RuneScape account. So what is it you get from online games? When I was gaming hardcore, it felt like I was making life progress towards what we would call a mission. And I think that's why so many men fall into the video game trap. They are progressive simulators. Are you flapping in the wind when it comes to short and long-term goals? Are you trying to simulate progress? Well, what progress are you trying to simulate? Now, the op answer to this one, it's definitely been to simulate progress. It's always the MMOs that I get sucked into. It was a slippery transition period between practicing jiu-jitsu and going back to school to finish my math degree. When I realized my classes were not nearly as difficult as I anticipated, I slipped into the game for about a month. I got out of it by setting a stricter workout plan and diet, and I'm now looking to get back into another martial arts program that I can balance with school and lifting. I think my main fault was due to poor planning of my free time. I should have stayed with my jiu-jitsu dim during the first month of school, then transitioned out if there was a lack of time. I think a part of me wanted to give up jiu-jitsu as well. It was difficult and humbling. I was being cheap and saving that $200 a month. So back to the advice. You can see some more details come out here. Obviously, he's got that smart guy attitude, which I've had it myself in the past. And that you think of yourself as a smart guy, and I would imagine somebody getting a math degree would probably think of himself that way. And so when things don't come effortlessly, he tends to quit them. A math nerd doing jiu-jitsu is probably getting humbled on a regular basis. The fact that he's not instantly catching on to it means he doesn't think of himself as a smart guy, and so his ego says, you better quit this, so that way we can keep that ego in check. It's like a narcissistic fantasy for the most part. And the advice I give to that one is this generic advice I give to almost everybody that's completely misunderstood. I always tell a guy, you ain't, and that's okay. So why does any of this matter to you? It's for that last line for the most part. A lot of guys have this problem where they're too smart for their own good. They're smart enough that the average daily activities aren't very challenging, and so it leaves kind of a void in a man's soul where he needs to accomplish something. And video games are a great use of that, so is sports. Pretty much anything that doesn't have to do with building up wealth or resources, that kind of stuff. Most of those things act in that capacity. The problem is, when you're smart, you're not used to having to work hard at something it's difficult for you. It's an ego-invested mindset that you really need to shed. So when you're looking at this one, think back through your life. Look at those places where, and I'm assuming you think of yourself as a smart guy, and heck, maybe you are. Maybe you're truly gifted. But you got to ask yourself, when something gets challenging, what's the first thing you do? Is it quit? Make up some reason? Maybe don't try too hard, and then when you fail, it's kind of like, yeah, well, I could have tried harder, but had I put in the effort, it would have been great. If you see yourself making those excuses, you're falling into the exact same trap as this guy. Add to that if you have any kind of addictive personality, and it's just a recipe for success. And by success, I mean absolute dismal failure. Just remember, there's lots of stories of these guys who are extremely gifted and then died too short, drug or alcohol abuse. It's usually a combination of this to some greater extent. So it's something to keep in the back of your head. If you find you're too smart to get things done and you're constantly making excuses, well then it's your ego that has to go, not the jujitsu. An alternative for this guy, well, here's the thing, he kind of knows what he has to do, he's just not able to do it. And this is really the tragic part, because this is the exact kind of situation where a good wife would be that support you could lean on to help you through this kind of stuff, but it doesn't really work that way. A woman will see this, get increasingly frustrated, start looking for an out, basically blaming you, and because you've had some addictive personality or some poor behaviors, it really makes it easy for people to dislike you. So, this is the kind of thing that it's good to have a guy, like a best friend, a really good best friend, to kind of help you out. But for the most part, I mean, you're on your own. This guy kind of knows what he has to do. The only problem is he's still holding out of that mental model of him being a very smart guy who doesn't really need to put in effort. If he switches his mental model, and I don't even want to say it's a humility thing, it's almost a self-deprecation. It really does work. When I say that you ain't and that's okay, I really mean it. Once you accept you're not the smartest guy in the room, even if you are, but once you accept it, you stop looking at things as if they're a form of identity, or as I would call it, narcissistic fuel. In this case, the narcissistic fantasy is that you're a very smart man, wink wink trademark, and that everything you do has to reinforce that as the fuel, and if it doesn't, it causes a lesser form of narcissistic rage, or in his case, self-destructive behaviors and attitudes. I guarantee you, if he wasn't addicted to this video game when he should be working or taking care of his family, he probably wouldn't even worry about that stupid soap gift, because it's really a tangential issue. Its only benefit here is that it got him to be self-reflective for once, which is a good thing. But once you stop looking at your intelligence as if it's an investment or an identity, and you start looking at it as if it is just a tool to accomplish things, you're going to end up far better off in the long run. So if you take nothing else from this, take that from it. Your intelligence is a tool, same as your gumption, same as your strength, same as anything. And a tool is only as useful as the problems you put it towards solving. On that note, thanks guys for sticking around to this one. In the process right now of adding some new features for the Patreon supporters, and I'm not going to lie, huge shout out to all of them right now. We got about 150 guys in there, and every single one of them are what make all of this possible. So cheers to them, and cheers to you guys.